When I pulled into my driveway after 5 days away, the first thing I saw wasn't the red rocks I'd loved for 15 years. It was a helicopter hangar, a hulking slab of gray steel, twice as tall as any building on our road, perched right where a protected basin used to roll toward the horizon. Not a barn. Not a shed. A hangar. I stood next to my car with the engine still running, keys biting into my palm. This neighborhood had been quiet desert for decades, and I'd only been gone on a short trip to Portland. Now the view from my porch looked like an airfield. I walked straight through the dry wash to the neighboring lot without even taking my bag inside. That land had been empty as long as I'd been here, archaeological buffer zone, federally listed, home to some of the oldest petroglyphs in northern Arizona. I helped write the original environmental assessment myself when I was 27. It wasn't just dirt to me. It was the first project I'd ever felt proud of. I used to bring my niece here on weekends, show her the spiral carvings and tell her how to find the lizard etched into the sandstone. And now it was gone under concrete. That's when I met him. Brent Kingston. He was leaning against a matte black SUV in a linen shirt and bright turquoise loafers, drinking something orange out of a champagne flute. He had a pilot's headset draped around his neck like a necklace and a Mont Blanc pen clipped to his collar, the kind of detail you can't unsee. "Neighbor," he called, flashing teeth like we were old friends. "Welcome back to paradise." "Alex Morris," I said. "Environmental engineer. I live right there." I pointed to my porch. "What is this? A beauty, isn't she?" He gestured at the hangar like it was a new car. "Private chopper, state-of-the-art soundproofing. You won't even notice it." I looked at the concrete pad bleeding right up to the edge of the buffer line. My survey flags were gone. "This is a protected archaeological corridor," I said, my voice steady but my heart hammering. "There are mapped petroglyphs less than half a mile from here." Brent tilted his head and gave me a smirk. "All above board. Lawyers checked twice. Fast-tracked as an agricultural storage structure. It's amazing what you can do if you know the right forms." He said it like a punchline. I forced myself to breathe. "You're inside the protection zone. Look, Alex, history's nice and all, but it's not gonna sue me." He raised his glass. "Progress, right?" I could taste metal at the back of my tongue. My father used to bring me out to these rocks before he died, to watch sunsets and sketch the carvings. Those memories were the reason I bought my house here. Hearing Brent call it dirt felt like someone spitting on a family album. "I'd double-check your property lines," I said quietly. He laughed, a deep, dismissive laugh that carried across the dust. "I've got lawyers on retainer, Alex. Good ones. The kind who make things disappear." Something flickered behind my ribs. Not rage, colder than that. The realization that he knew and didn't care. Back when things were normal, this stretch outside Sedona wasn't even really a neighborhood. Just scattered homes on long lots where you could still hear coyotes at night. I'd bought my place 15 years ago because it was quiet, unspoiled, and because those petroglyphs reminded me why I'd gone into this line of work in the first place. I'm single, no kids, just a shepherd mix named Wren who's terrified of thunder but follows me everywhere. I review environmental impact statements for a living. My job isn't glamorous, but it's about keeping places like this from becoming someone's trophy project. I thought that meant something until Brent showed up 6 months ago. He didn't ease in. He arrived with a Mercedes Sprinter, a luxury RV, and a different crowd every weekend. Food trucks on the lot, drones overhead filming slow-mo parties. He had no mailbox number for months. No one knew what he actually built, they just whispered about Kingston money and hoped he'd get bored. I wasn't one of those people. I started watching. First a backhoe with no posted permit. Then a temporary fence. Then rumors, a private build, exclusive, something. When I left for Portland last week there was still nothing vertical. I figured I'd deal with it when I got back. Now the thing towered over my fence like a spaceship. 2 days later, he hosted what he called a launch party, dropped glossy invites into every mailbox, including mine. I didn't go, but from my porch I watched high-heeled guests stepping into the dust in a valet parking cars where wildflowers used to grow. Then the chopper came in. Loud, unapologetic, vibrating my window frames until Wren bolted under the deck and wouldn't come out for hours. The next morning one of my last survey flags lay crumpled in the dirt, tire tracks across the wash. I walked over. Brent met me in mirrored sunglasses, still holding a mimosa. "You're being awfully territorial for a guy who doesn't own the sky," he said. I told him, evenly, that his noise violated local decibel ordinances and that his hangar was inside a cultural protection zone. He sipped his drink and grinned. "Alex, relax. The county loves me. My helicopter's quieter than your dog." That was the moment it hit me fully. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't ignorance. It was arrogance, the kind that assumes no one will fight back because no one ever has. I said nothing. Just turned and walked back toward my porch, feeling the desert heat rise off the concrete that had buried 1,000 years of history. That night I drove into town and pulled the property file at the county clerk's office. No environmental review. No cultural survey. A fast-tracked, agricultural storage permit with no elevation plan. A barn on paper. A hangar in real life. I sat in my truck under the flickering parking lot light, fingers shaking around the printout. This wasn't just wrong. It was illegal. And as I started the engine, my headlights swept across an old photo taped to my dash, me and my niece sitting by the spiral petroglyph, grinning under the sunset. That spiral is now under Brent Kingston's concrete. I drove home in silence, heart beating with a new kind of certainty. I wasn't letting this go. I didn't show up to the neighborhood watch meeting. But I watched it anyway, live-streamed from someone's phone, pixelated and shaky, just the way small-town accountability looks these days. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, laptop open, muted, a glass of water sweating beside me. Brent stood in the back row with that casual lean he always used, the posture of a man who's never been told no and wouldn't know how to hear it if he was. They were talking about speed limits. Dust control. Trivial things. No one mentioned the hangar. No one asked why helicopters now flew in low over protected land like it was nothing. And Brent? He looked comfortable. Like he owned the place already. He even brought cookies. I stopped going into town during daylight. The truth was, I didn't want to bump into anyone, not yet. Instead, I drove out to the ranger station on the East Ridge, where most of the seasonal rangers hadn't rotated in yet. The guy manning the desk was young, maybe mid-20s, with a National Park Service badge on one sleeve and a sunburn that told me he wasn't from around here. "You guys still keep original site plans out here?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Digitized mostly. Not the ones from before 2006. That made him pause. After a beat, he stood and disappeared behind a metal shelf of rolled maps. I waited, pretending to read the visitor brochure about preserving ancient rock art. He came back with a tube. Old, worn, labeled in fading Sharpie, Corridor B/East Petroglyph Survey. 2004-05. I didn't unroll it there. I just nodded my thanks, signed the checkout slip, and walked out with the tube tucked under my arm like a rifle. At home, I unrolled the map slowly, spreading it over the folding table in my guest room, which had now quietly become my workbench. I lined it up with the new satellite images I'd downloaded the night before. And there it was. Clear as day. The old map marked the boundary line at a different coordinate, a full 58 feet east of where it sits today. Right through the foundation of Brent's hangar. Somebody had moved it. Refiled it. Buried it in new GIS layers. Quietly. Which meant Brent didn't just ignore the law. Someone helped him erase it. I sat back in my chair, the paper crackling under my arms. I wasn't angry. I was focused. Later that week, I saw Brent in town. First time since our last run-in. I was at the hardware store buying fasteners and plywood for a side project, nothing dramatic. Just cleaning up, keeping busy. He spotted me in the parking lot. "Alex. Man, where've you been?" I nodded. "Laying low." "Ah, smart. Heat's killer lately." He stepped in closer, lowered his voice just a little. "You good about everything now?" "Still hearing chatter from folks." I played dumb. "About what?" "You know," he waved vaguely toward the hills. "The chopper stuff. That whole protection zone thing you used to go on about." I shrugged. "Wasn't my call to make, was it?" Brent grinned, slapped my shoulder. "Exactly. You can't stop progress, right?" His smile tightened for just a second. "Not much. But enough." He didn't like that I'd stopped complaining. He didn't know what that silence meant. And that was the point. Back at home, I pulled up the old files for my graduate research. It took an hour to find the right folder, half the stuff hadn't been backed up since the Bush administration. When I did find it, I clicked through the photos slowly. Sun-faded snapshots. Surveyors kneeling next to carved spirals, etchings of deer, human stick figures with stretched arms. My team had mapped 147 distinct petroglyphs in that zone. I still remembered the feeling of chalk on my fingers, the way the rock warmed up around noon. Then I saw it. Slide number 19. A spiral carved low into a flat boulder. Barely visible. That exact boulder now sat beneath the northwest corner of Brent's slab. Buried. I didn't swear. I didn't throw anything. I just labeled the file. Spiral_19_confirmed_destroyed. JPG. And kept going. 2 days later, I dropped by the planning department. Not to report anything, yet, but just to ask a few questions, under the pretense of a private project I was considering. I brought donuts. Wore a baseball cap. Acted bored. And while the front desk assistant was printing me a sample permit package, I casually asked, "You guys ever do fast-track zoning reviews for structures over 20 feet?" She frowned. "Only if it's AG exempt. Barns and stuff?" "Yeah." "Why?" I smiled. "Just wondering. Friend of mine's building something big. Said it was no problem. Thought maybe I missed a memo." That's when a guy in the back office, older, salt and pepper hair, looked like he lived on black coffee, peeked his head out. "What friend?" he asked. "No one you know," I said quickly. "Guy from out of town." He didn't press. But he watched me leave. Good. That meant someone inside might be feeling the itch of exposure. One evening near sunset, I biked up to the ridge again. The light was pink over the desert, turning the rock faces soft and gold. It was the kind of evening people move to Arizona for. At the top, I stopped by the overlook where cell signal finally kicked in. I checked my downloads. The new satellite map had come through. I tapped the screen, zoomed in. That shadow again, the one from Brent's hangar, had extended farther than before. Different angle. Longer reach. And that meant it wasn't just a violation of the protection zone. It was encroachment onto someone else's parcel. A technicality? Maybe. But technicalities are what people like Brent never think will bite them. And they're exactly what people like me live for. That night, I stood at the edge of my property line with Ren next to me. The moon was low, fat, yellow like a watchful eye. The hangar loomed silent. But I knew it was alive inside, humming servers, temperature control systems, helicopter batteries trickle charging. Ren sat beside my leg, ears tilted slightly toward the breeze. I took a deep breath. slipped the old ranger station map back into its tube and capped it. And then, with the concrete glowing faint in the moonlight, I whispered the only thing Brent Kingston would never take seriously until it was too late. Enjoy it while it lasts. Because I had just confirmed the last piece I needed. And silence was no longer my strategy. It was the signal. I was brushing dirt off my boots when I heard my name in a place it didn't belong. It was subtle, a woman's voice behind a half-open door at the county building, muffled by distance and old tile floors. I had just signed the logbook to access public archives and was about to step into the records room when I caught it. Yes, Alex Morris. The buffer zone guy. I paused mid-step, not breathing, hands still on the doorframe. The voice didn't sound annoyed. Just curious. But it was enough. Enough to tell me that someone, somewhere, had noticed I wasn't asking these questions out of idle nostalgia. My name was circulating again, maybe just as a whisper, but that was how these things always started. That was how men like Brent got nervous. And I wasn't ready for him to be nervous. Not yet. Back home, I replayed that sentence in my mind while Ren paced circles around the kitchen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let something slip, a phrase, a file request, an email timestamp that hadn't gone unnoticed. I opened my inbox and reread the messages between me and Gina, triple-checked for anything that could trace back to Brent's people. There was nothing. We'd been careful. Quiet. Systematic. But that's the thing about pressure, it doesn't always come from the obvious places. Sometimes it sneaks in through a crack you didn't know was there. That night, after Ren finally settled, I poured myself a drink and stared at the spiral carving from the 2007 photo I'd scanned. It looked faint under the poor lighting, the edges soft, the sandstone smudged. The student in the picture beside it was grinning, proud, unaware that a structure built 15 years later would grind that carving to dust. And for a brief moment, just a breath, I felt it. Doubt. Not in the facts. Not in the law. But in the fight itself. There was a part of me that wondered if this was worth it. If months of tracking signatures and parcel boundaries and elevation overlays could ever bring back what Brent had already paved over. Maybe the stone was gone. Maybe the silence meant he'd already won. I closed my laptop and stared out at the dark horizon until the feeling passed. Then I opened the file again, and I kept going. A few days later, Brent showed his first sign of confusion, and he didn't even know it. I was standing in the checkout line at the hardware store, picking up a replacement drive for my archive scanner, when I felt someone move into line behind me. I didn't look right away. But when I heard the voice, casual, a little forced, I turned. Alex, Brent said, too brightly, as if my name had been hanging on his tongue all day. Hey, I answered. He looked at the drive in my hand. Doing a little tech upgrade? Trying to digitize old stuff. The university records room's a mess. He gave a shallow laugh, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for me. Still on that history kick, huh? Never really stopped. There was a beat of silence before he asked, you ever figure out who moved those old boundary lines? Didn't you say something about that back in spring? I tilted my head, pretending to think. I must have. Can't remember. Brent grinned like I just made a joke he didn't get. But he wasn't relaxed. And that was the moment I knew, he'd heard something. Maybe from the clerk. Maybe from someone in permitting. Just a whisper. But it had reached him. Good. Let it chew at him. Later that week, I biked up the East Ridge again. Not for the exercise, not even for the view. I needed to see the hangar from above, needed to trace its shadow against the last sunlight and compare it to the GIS overlays I'd marked the night before. It was a ritual now, as routine as brushing my teeth. Shadow angle. Elevation point. Corner encroachment. Screenshot. Label. Archive. But something caught my eye this time. Something new. Brent wasn't alone. The hangar's side doors were open, floodlit from inside, and two men were standing beside a whiteboard covered in taped-up renderings. I pulled my camera lens to full zoom. Brent was talking with his hands, animated, pointing at sketches of sleek homes, each one with its own landing pad and some kind of solar array. There were logos drawn beside the models, mock branding for a new development line. One of the men nodded, then said something I couldn't hear. Brent raised his glass and replied, and even from that distance, I caught the words. Heli Estates. End-to-end vertical access. No roads, no sprawl, just sky. I froze. He wasn't just expanding. He was franchising the idea. Selling it. The hangar wasn't a passion project. It was a prototype. And if it stood, if no one stopped him, then the next valley over would look just like this one in 5 years. The protected land wasn't just being ignored. It was being packaged and sold as if the rules never mattered in the first place. I took the shot. Zoomed out. Marked the coordinates. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because when you name your plan, when you give it a brand and pitch it like gospel, you leave fingerprints all over the story. You give people like me exactly what we need. I called Gina the next day. Told her what I'd seen. What I'd heard. She paused. Did you record it? Still image. Clear enough to read the sketches. Perfect, she said. I've been waiting for intent. That's it. He's scaling based on a fraudulent structure. That makes it business misconduct. He can't hide behind ignorance anymore. And the old sightline photos? Combined with the planning clerk's lack of record? He's cooked. This is what we needed. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the charge behind it, the quiet buzz of a case locking into place. You ready to pull the cord? She asked. I think he already started unraveling it himself. That night, as if to underscore the point, I saw Brent again. Not in town, not by accident, but standing in front of the hangar, pacing. No guests, no music, no champagne flutes. Just him, alone, holding a phone to his ear and walking in short, clipped strides. I watched from my porch in the dark. Didn't move. Didn't even blink. He stopped suddenly, turned toward the fence, and stared in my direction. I don't know if he saw me. But I saw him. And there was something new in the way he stood, a hesitation, an edge. He wasn't celebrating anymore. He was waiting. I didn't wait. The next morning, I dropped off a sealed envelope at the State Historical Preservation Office, hand-delivered by courier. Inside, zoning maps, before and after. Parcel records with chain of title. 3 photos of the destroyed spiral carving. A notarized witness statement from a ranger who remembered the original boundary. And a copy of Brent's fast-track permit, signed by an expired notary. I didn't include a cover letter. Didn't need to. The facts would speak for themselves. I stood by the window that night, watching the light fade over the red hills. The hangar looked quiet again. Innocent, even, from a distance. But I knew better. It wasn't a structure anymore. It was evidence. And for the first time in months, I finally felt still. If Brent Kingston thought building over history would erase it, he was about to learn what happens when you try to rewrite the land with concrete and arrogance. Some records can be deleted. Others are carved in stone. Brent was smiling when he stepped onto that stage. I stood at the back of the County Civic Center, a rented banquet hall dressed up in eucalyptus garlands and hanging LED lights, while he raised his glass and toasted a room full of donors and local officials. His voice came through the speakers with that same rehearsed charm I'd heard months earlier across my fence line, only now it was wrapped in buzzwords he thought made him untouchable. Here's to the future, he said, eyes shining. To vertical integration, sustainable elevation, and communities that don't sprawl, they ascend. The crowd laughed. Someone clapped too soon. Brent gave a small bow, soaking it in like sunlight. He didn't know what had landed in the clerk's inbox that morning. He didn't know what was coming for him. I watched him from the shadows, arms folded, feeling nothing but stillness in my chest. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just a quiet awareness that this was the last time he'd ever speak from a stage as a man who believed he was above the rules. Let him toast. He wouldn't be smiling tomorrow. The next morning, the flag went up. I knew the moment Gina's text came through, just after dawn, hold triggered. Injunction filed. He's going to squeal. And he did, loudly. According to a contact in the zoning office, Brent's team showed up just after opening hours, demanding to know why the parcel had been locked from further development and why they hadn't been warned. A clerk calmly read off the official language: violation of protective cultural buffer zone. Pending review by SHPO, HAC, and SCPA. The assistant, the same guy who once delivered Brent's business cards in a branded drone case, started shouting about authorization errors. Brent himself showed up an hour later and marched into the building like a man expecting apologies. But when he was handed the formal notice, he didn't say a word. He just stared at it, blinked once, and asked, "Who filed this?" The clerk shrugged. "Anonymous counsel, per state code." He wasn't angry yet. He was confused. The panic would come later. It didn't take long for the agencies to move. Gina had tied it all together too neatly: maps, time-stamped parcel photos, GIS overlays, a chain of documents showing the notary lapse, and a certified ranger affidavit confirming that the spiral carving, the one now entombed in Brent's concrete, had been documented at that precise coordinate 15 years prior. 2 days later, the State Historical Preservation Office issued a formal finding: unauthorized disturbance of culturally significant protected terrain. Brent appealed. Of course he did. But the evidence wasn't abstract, it was physical, archived, and visual. One of the board members even quoted back part of Brent's own development pitch during the session: minimal impact vertical estates. Then she asked flatly, "Is that what you call building a helipad on top of an archaeological site?" His face, they said, drained completely. But it wasn't the ruling that ruined him. Not yet. It was what came next: the court-mandated demolition order. Not a warning. Not a fine. Total removal. By law. A state-mandated team would oversee the dismantling of the entire hangar, piece by piece, under archaeological supervision, to protect any remaining subsurface markers. Every bolt, every panel, every imported screw, gone. When Brent heard the order was public, he tried to spin it, issued a statement blaming the bureaucratic overreach of outdated preservation codes. He even claimed the spiral carving may not have been authentic. A mistake. Because within 24 hours, 3 former university researchers published an open letter confirming the carving's location, date, and cultural lineage, complete with photos and field notes. One included a selfie with it from 2007. That's when the press turned. Local news stations parked vans outside the now-closed gates of Brent's compound. A popular blog ran the headline: "The developer who paved over 1,000 years of history, and lost." Investors pulled out within a week. And I finally saw what real collapse looked like. It was 2 days before the teardown began. I was at the edge of my own property, pretending to adjust a loose fence board, when I heard gravel scatter and turned to see Brent standing on his driveway, surrounded by 3 crewmen in safety vests. He was pleading. Not yelling. Pleading. "No, listen, just give me the weekend. I can have a reevaluation ordered. This whole thing's being blown out of proportion." The stone was barely visible, it was weathered, nobody even knew it was. One of the crew members cut him off. "We're following the state's timeline, sir. You'll need to move anything personal out of the structure by noon. After that, it's sealed." Brent opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked back toward the hangar, that gleaming monument to himself, and then turned slowly toward me. We made eye contact. I didn't look away. He didn't wave. Didn't nod. Just stared. And in that moment, I saw the man who once laughed in my face when I raised concerns about zoning. Who told me connections and lawyers would protect him. Who called ancient markings rock scribbles. Who said progress didn't need permission. Now he couldn't even stop a backhoe. The demolition began on a Tuesday. No ceremony. No press. Just dust, clanking metal, and the slow ache of undoing. They started from the south end, the slab closest to the ridge, and worked inward with surgical care. They weren't just dismantling a hangar. They were unspooling arrogance. By the third day, the floor came up. That's when they found it. A worker knelt at the exposed stone, called over the supervisor, and pointed. I couldn't see it clearly from my yard, but I knew before the tarp went up. Gina confirmed it by text an hour later. The spiral's still there. Partial exposure. Beautiful. They're documenting it now. I went to see it that evening, with permission, escorted by a quiet, gray-haired woman from the preservation board who didn't recognize me until I introduced myself. "You're Morris," she said, peering at me over her glasses. "You're the one who filed?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked down at the uncovered stone, then back at me. "Good." That's all she said. I stood at the edge of the taped boundary as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the now silent lot. The hangar was nearly gone, just steel bones and a pile of white cladding waiting to be hauled. But in the exposed earth, there it was. The spiral. Weathered. Faint. Incomplete. But there. I crouched beside it and said nothing. Didn't touch it. Didn't take a picture. Just looked. "Made it through," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to the stone or myself. Sometimes, I think it's both. Gina visited the week after the last truck rolled out. We sat on the porch, just like before, drinks in hand, Ren at our feet. "You look tired," she said. "I am." "Worth it?" I didn't answer right away. I was watching the wind move through the empty lot across the way. No noise. No flashing lights. No whirring blades. Just space. "I don't think I did this for revenge," I finally said. "No? I think I did it so no one would think they could do it again." She nodded. "Well, you made it real hard." I looked at her, then smiled. "Good." Brent left town soon after. Packed what was left of his reputation into a rental van and skipped out on a planned launch event for a project in Utah. Word got around. Investors don't like to be embarrassed, especially not in headlines. He was toxic now, even in circles that once praised his vision. As for me, I stayed. I still hike the ridge. Still visit the exposed stone, which has since been covered with protective mesh and a shaded viewing sign. Sometimes, I see families stop and point at it, explaining what it means. What it survived. And every time I pass the new boundary marker, the one reset in red at the base of the hill, I run my fingers across the painted letters. B-Zone Start. Right where it belongs. Brent thought burying the past would silence it. Turns out, he just gave it something louder to say.